Times overnight. The Pentagon is undertaking a review of AUKUS, the nuclear-powered submarine and technology deal. The news set the hairs running in Australia, with opponents of AUKUS encouraged by the appearance of doubts in the Trump administration. It follows US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth telling Australia to increase defence spending by tens of billions of dollars. The Prime Minister is shortly on his way to the G7 in Canada, where it's anticipated he'll meet President Donald Trump. Joining me now is Defence Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles. Richard Marles, welcome back to 7:30.
Good evening, Sarah.
Now, the US Under-Secretary of Defence, Bridge Colby, has called for this review of AUKUS. What's driving him?
Well, I think it's pretty natural that a new administration, a new government coming into power, seeks to engage in a review of a very significant initiative such as this. It's what the incoming Labor government in the United Kingdom did. They undertook a review of AUKUS, and it's reported, and in fact was very favourable about AUKUS and the role that it will play. Really, we did it when we came into power back in 2022, when we undertook the Defence Strategic Review. And whilst that looked at the entirety of our defence posture, clearly AUKUS was a very central component to it. It was a key part of what the Defence Strategic Review looked at and reported upon. And so we welcome this review. We will engage with it. We're confident about the process of it. But we'd also point out that in all the engagements we've had with the Trump administration, there has been a positive view in relation to AUKUS, and we are confident about its progress under the Trump administration.
Well, you can sound as optimistic as you like, but we know that Bridge Colby has doubts about AUKUS, and in particular the ability of the US to produce enough boats to service the US Navy. If those doubts about the capacity of the US production line are confirmed, what does this mean? What would that mean for Australia?
Well, the challenges in relation to the production and sustainment of Virginia-class submarines in America has been well understood from the outset. We've known that when going right back to when the optimal pathway was announced in March of 2023.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in there, Richard Marles, because as you say, these problems have been around for a long time. We've been aware of them for a long time. The US has been aware of them. Now Bridge Colby is looking at those details. What's it going to mean if he comes up with a conclusion that says they cannot provide boats to Australia?
Well, I mean, the challenges are well known, and we are confident about our ability to increase those production rates and those sustainment rates. And sustainment is as important, if not more, than the actual production of the Virginias. But the point I would make is that when you look at the way in which the optimal pathway is structured, right now what we have is Australia making a financial contribution to the industrial base of the United States in respect of both production and sustainment. Right now, there's something like 120, 130 Australian tradespeople who are in Pearl Harbor working on putting Virginia-class submarines to sea. That's great for us in terms of the training and skills they acquire, but it's really good for the United States. The establishment of the Submarine Rotational Force West, which will occur at HMAS Stirling south of Perth, is a place from which Virginia-class submarines of the United States Navy will operate, but it's also a place where you will see sustainment and maintenance of those submarines occurring. So when you look at what we are doing with AUKUS, it is all about, in these years, in these immediate years, upping that sustainment and production rate.
But let me just ask you, hold on 1 minute there, because what we know that, yes, I take your point about the activity taking place at Stirling, the activity taking place within Admiral Meade's operation. We might come to that in a moment. But the key point is that the production of the Virginia class has never reached 2 boats a year, and that is what the US Navy needs it to reach to enable boats to be made available to Australia. So if that production capacity is not reached, what do you plan to do?
Well, we need to get to that point in the early 2030s. That's the time frame. And right now, we are confident that we can meet that. and we are seeing real progress, increases in both production and sustainment associated with what we're doing with AUKUS and what the Americans themselves are doing, and we're confident that we can get to that point. That's what is set out in the agreement that we already have with the United States, which forms part of the treaty that we now have between the US and the UK. I think it's completely appropriate for this administration to have a look at all of the facts and figures around that. But when you do, the story that it tells is that we are getting those production and sustainment rates up. But critically important is that the Australian contribution to that is profoundly significant.
All right, let's come back to Secretary Hegseth, because he said to you at the meeting that you had with him at the Shangri-La Dialogue recently, just a couple of weeks ago, he said to you directly that the US expects Australia to increase defence spending by to reach up to $100 billion a year. You said at the time that Australia is up for the conversation. Is Prime Minister Albanese up for the same conversation?
Look, we'll engage with the United States as our alliance partner, and of course we will respectfully engage in all of those conversations.
Yeah, I'm sure, but please come back to the question, if you would, Deputy Prime Minister, for a moment. It's a very direct question. Is the Prime Minister up for a conversation about lifting the defence budget of Australia by tens of billions of dollars a year, as Pete Hegseth, the US Secretary of Defence, asked of you?
Well, the point that the Prime Minister has made, which is clear, which is exactly right, is that in terms of how we think about defence spending, that is a function of Australia's national interest. It is a function of the strategic landscape that Australia faces, the strategic threat that Australia faces, and the strategic challenge that we are seeking to meet, and the way in which we resource the Defence Force to meet it. And having articulated all of that, the Prime Minister has made completely clear that as national security is a key priority of this government, that resourcing will occur, and that's what has occurred. That is what we've been doing since we've come to office.
Let me put the question to you. We're a little short of time, so I'm just hold on. I'm just going to put the question to you. Just hold on a minute.
We've gone through this in a very methodical way, and we have increased defence spending to this point in time.
Well, there's a question about that was raised by Angus Houston, who co-authored your defence review. He spelled out that AUKUS must be a net addition to Australia's military capability, not draw from it. But let me just ask you a different question about the Prime Minister. Has the Prime Minister tried to get a meeting with President Trump in Washington?
Well, look, I'm not about to go through all of the engagements and the communications which happen between the Prime Minister and the President. I mean, I expect at some point in the near term, the Prime Minister and the President will meet, and when they do, no doubt they'll talk about all the issues that exist across our relationship, both in terms of national security and our economic relationship as well. But what he has said in terms of the question of defence spending is really clear. We will resource the needs of the nation, and that is what we have been doing as a government since we came to power, with the single biggest peacetime increase in defence spending in Australia's history.
But still way below what the Americans are asking of you, and presumably what President Trump would ask of the Prime Minister were they to meet either on the sidelines of the G7 or in Washington.
Well, we'll have the conversation with the United States. I mean, we will obviously respectfully do that with our alliance partner, but we will fund defence based on Australia's national interest. That's the very clear point that the Prime Minister has made, and that what it's about is not a specific number. It is about capability, working out what we need and funding that capability, and that's what we've been doing since the moment that we came to office back in May of 2022. We obviously inherited a pretty dire circumstance from the former coalition government in terms of both the state of the defence budget and the state of defence capability. We've been in the business of restoring that and lifting defence spending well above where the coalition had it, and we'll continue the process of assessing our needs and resourcing them, and that is the point that the Prime Minister has made abundantly clear.
Defence Minister, Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles, thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thanks, Sarah.
And former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull joins me now. I'll just get your response to that because, of course, what we want to know is what happens when Bridge Colby, the Under-Secretary of Defence, does his 30-day review. He's already expressed doubts about AUKUS. What happens at the end of what do you think happens at the end of that review?
Well, I want to pick up a couple of things Richard said. Richard Marles said that the rate of production of Virginia class submarines is increasing. That's not true. The latest numbers given to the Congress by the Navy on the 11th of March this year was that the rate of production is 1.1 per annum. They need to get to 2 by 2028 to be able to meet their own requirements and to 2.33 to meet their own plus Australia's. And they have not been able to lift production rates despite the expenditure of over $10 billion over the last 6 or 7 years. So they've got a real problem there. So with great respect to Richard, I'm sure he's been misinformed. What he said is not right. Now, in terms of Bridge Colby, Bridge's point that he's made previously is simply this, that the legislation clearly states that no submarine can be transferred to Australia unless the President certifies that it will not degrade the undersea capabilities of the US Navy. They're short of submarines today. They're producing about half as many as they need to produce for their own needs. The competitive threat from China is increasing, and there is a risk of war imminently, according to Hegseth, over Taiwan. Now, in that environment, all Colby has said is, really, can we really spare these boats? And I think that they'll conclude in the review that that question is either answered in the negative, they can't spare them, or they certainly won't be saying they can.
So what happens if it is answered in the negative? Because if your facts about the production line in the US are correct and Richard Marles's are incorrect.
Well, according to the US Navy, the US Navy should know.
Indeed,
so it's their evidence, 11th of March.
Presumably Bridge Colby knows that already.
I'm sure he does.
You know, we know that he knows there are problems with US production. So what happens at the end of this? Is this a death knell for AUKUS?
Well,
it's a very big question.
It's not a death knell for AUKUS. This has got to be clear. The United States can comply with the AUKUS agreement and not give us any subs. It's a term of the deal. You know, it's something that Richard's government, Morrison's government went into this deal on the basis that the Americans' obligation to transfer submarines was subject to some very heavy conditions, and which we've just discussed. So AUKUS can continue, the collaboration. The Americans certainly would expect us to continue providing a new submarine base for them in Perth, a new dockyard to maintain their submarines. They'd love to keep getting our brightest sailors serving on their boats. I'm sure they'd like to continue receiving the $3 billion, which Richard's given them the first deposit of. But as to whether we get any submarines, that will be judged purely and solely in accordance with their legislation in America's interest. Now, and it is America first. That's the zeitgeist.
And you know, it may be called America First now, but I'm not sure who's making the argument that it was ever anything other than America First. Yeah. But that's a broader discussion point.
This is a point that Trump's done us a favour, that he's basically, you know, he's being very honest in the sense he's saying, I'm putting America's interest first, America's interest alone first. And, you know, we've got to recognise that. So it's not a question of Trump reneging on a deal or double-crossing us. We've done a deal, that's why I say it's a really dumb deal. I mean, Trump will love this deal. He'll just want to be able to do some more dumb deals with people like us with a lot of money.
Let me just come back to some of the other things that were said today, because as I said at the beginning, this story in the Financial Times did set the hares running. It brought Scott Morrison back. Now, he is saying that, he said this today, that the problem with the deal that existed before, which I didn't say to the viewers at the beginning, which was your deal to get French submarines, the government's deal under your government, the Turnbull government. He said today that the subs you were going to buy would have been obsolete before they got wet. I think he said they weren't going to turn up until 2038. So let's clear that up.
Both of those are untrue. The first submarine was planned to be ready and in the water in 2032. So that first, as far as them being obsolete, the attack-class submarines were the latest, based on the latest French nuclear-powered submarine. They were going to have the Lockheed Martin Combat Management System, which is the same as the Virginia-class submarines have. So the brains of the boat would have been the same as those on the Virginias. And, I mean, if Scott's trying to say that, you know, conventional propulsion as opposed to nuclear propulsion is obsolete, well, there are new submarines being built all around the world that are not nuclear powered. So I think this was, you know, anyway, but both those statements he made were untrue.
There's one other point he made today that I would like to get you to address, which is the broader point about us relying on the United States. He said that critics of this arrangement, that is the AUKUS arrangement, are delusional to suggest there is another power that can provide our security. Is that your argument?
Well, I'm not making that argument at all. See, what Scott is doing is setting up a straw man. I'm simply making the point that we have a submarine deal which is very likely to end up with us having no submarines, and that we've got to start acknowledging that risk. It is a real, recognised risk in the deal, and plan for an alternative. That may be getting submarines from somewhere else. It may be buying long-range strike capabilities, long-range bombers and so forth. All of this is being canvassed in America and in the American Congress, but we're not allowed to talk about it here. Otherwise, you get accused of wanting to abandon the American alliance. It's not Australia that's walking away from the United States. It's the United States that's pulling away from its allies. But we have to live in the real world. The people that are deluded are the ones that are ignoring the real risks in this deal and the fact that we should have responsibly a plan B.
But, I mean, the driving question here really is around timeline. That's the reason for the questions to Richard Marles. It's obviously going to be part of Bridge Colby's inquiry. Is it too late for Australia to acquire a submarine fleet outside of AUKUS? Can you start again?
Well, look, we're certainly leaving it very late, and I think it may be that it is too late. Maybe that we end up with no submarines. That may be Scott's great achievement, that we'll end up with no submarines. But let's assume that's the worst case. In that case, what we should be doing, and this is certainly what's being canvassed by the Americans, we should be investing in alternatives. We could do the base, do the maintenance, leave the submarining to the Americans, and invest in other military capabilities that give us the ability to defend ourselves over a long range missiles, long-range bombers. Those capabilities we could acquire. But unless we start planning for a plan B, we will end up with nothing. We'll have a plan A that hasn't come to fruition, and we'll have, because we don't want to admit that that may not work out, we'll have no plan B, and we end up precisely with nothing at all. And that's just reckless government.
All right, Malcolm Turnbull, thank you for joining us today. Much more to go on this. We'll keep the debate going.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I take my glasses off because this is a very special moment. I'd like to introduce my next guest, who is not really a guest at all. It's 730's new political editor, Jacob Greber. With an almost 30-year career in journalism covering politics, economics and world affairs, all the things that we want, he's been a foreign correspondent as well and got his start working as a copy boy in the Canberra Press Gallery. You can't beat that. Jacob Greber joins me now from Canberra. Jacob, a very big, warm welcome aboard.
Thank you, Sarah. That makes me sound ancient, doesn't it?
It does make you sound ancient. Look at him. Yep. That simply can't be possible. Let me just take you straight away to the political implications of this debate that we're having today. Bridge Colby is going to conduct a review. What does this mean for Anthony Albanese and the US demands on Australia to increase our defence spending? How do all these pieces fit together, Jacob? That's the question.
Yeah, and that's really what this is all about. The Americans have been apparently clearly frustrated by Anthony Albanese's reluctance to sort of talk up ambition around spending, this debate around the level of spending to GDP. And lo and behold, this report appears a short time later. That certainly set everyone into a real tiz about it. It's allowed people such as your guest sitting next to you there to once again make the point that this was probably not a great deal and there is in fact no plan B here. And so that is what the Americans are putting pressure on the Prime Minister. They're in a sense trying to flush him out on spending commitments. And this fundamental idea that it's very difficult to acquire something like AUKUS, these submarines, in addition to maintaining all the other obligations and sustainment that are required in defence. And so the timing is not accidental. He's about to get on a plane to North America, to Canada, where there is an expectation he will meet Trump. So it's reached that level. It's going to be very difficult, I think, for this discussion to be pushed down the line to ministers and officials. It's now at the top level. And once Trump gets involved, as you know, things get unpredictable.
So that's a question I have, Jacob, is this meeting now looks like it may take place on the sidelines of the G7 in Canada, as you just referred to. But is there a reason why the Prime Minister isn't having a meeting with Donald Trump in the White House? Is it just diary and happenstance, or does Anthony Albanese not want to go into one of those White House meetings?
Into that sort of bear pit that has swallowed up other leaders.
Yes.
The Americans like to call it the greatest advantage in diplomacy is that room. And the Prime Minister may or may not go there. It looks like he won't. It's not even clear yet. They haven't been able to confirm that he's having a meeting with Donald Trump himself. That's quite extraordinary this close to a summit of this kind. But I think it also points to Anthony Albanese's own sense of strength on these issues. He's come off a thumping majority on May 3. He feels Australians voted for his approach. They also rejected an alternative approach that might have been seen as bowing to Donald Trump in the first instance. And I think what you're going to see is the Prime Minister is going to push against that idea. He's certainly not going to go and beg for any special favour from Donald Trump on this. And so that sets up a very interesting dynamic. Donald Trump, of course, this is a deal. He wants to extract some more out of this and make it his.
And just briefly, Jacob, but it is a sort of implacable request from the Americans, isn't it, that we make this huge increase in defence spending. How does the Prime Minister, this is a difficult question for you to answer quickly, but here's a challenge on your first night. How does he deal with that request?
Well, he's going to have to explain why it is that Australia is not pushing its spending in terms of GDP to the sort of levels that, frankly, most of the other participants at the G7 this weekend are talking about. Whether they get there or not is a different matter. That's all about taxing your people more or cutting spending. But ultimately, Germany, the UK, Canada, they're all pushing in this direction. And Anthony Albanese sticking to the line that he will fund as is required. And of course, anyone in the sort of defence complex will tell you it's not really how it's working. There's a real contest now between dollars for AUKUS and dollars for everything else.
Jacob Greber, a very warm welcome to 7:30. I look forward to spending a lot of time with you on air. Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks very much.